All right, so welcome to the game report. We have Dewey Delettre with us today, and we're gonna learn a little bit more about him. He is the president of Savannah Basketball Association. So, Dewey, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into officiating.
Well, been doing this a little over 35 years. Started really playing in the adult leagues, and took a officiating basketball course at Armstrong, but also helped coach at the boys club and the church and intramurals. And when I wasn't coaching, I was helping refereeing. So kind of did it, on the side thing. And I think I couldn't really do this at high school level, but when I started playing, and we're thinking it's NBA championship, and I see a couple of guys out there refereeing, just kind of going through the motions. I'm saying, man, I could do that. So a good friend of mine, his father was doing it, and he started doing it at a high school level. So I kind of joined and kind of took off from there. First when you're trying to play a little bit and referee, it's kind of tough to blend the schedules. So I just ended up just kind of, just refereeing or kind of calling on the nights that I wasn't playing, but then just kind of ventured into having family and refereeing. So
That's kind of how a lot of folks get started. They play and then they end up carrying it on. That's kind of how I was, and a lot of guys that I work with are the same way. So one thing that you and I have, thank you for your time for coming on tonight too. But one thing that you and I have talked a good bit about, over the phone and at different meetings and different, conferences is the playoff selection process. And that's a real sensitive topic for a lot of people. Now, you're predominantly basketball, right?
Right.
Okay. And can you walk us through just the nuts and bolts? It doesn't have to get too detailed, but just the basic components of how to qualify for basketball playoffs for Georgia high school.
Well, you have to take the online clinic. You have to take the exam, and you have to make 85 or better to be eligible for postseason. You also, as of like 3 years ago, you have to go to a Georgia high school postseason camp every year to remain qualified. It was every other year, and they changed it to every year about 3 years ago or so. And that's pretty much the qualifications. It doesn't really stop there because they separate basketball separated by district. I think football is too, but we have a district that they allot so many tournament games to and sites for tournaments. So we take those sites with the district, and then we kind of break them down into how many postseason eligible officials we have by associations, and then we kind of break out the games that way. So we can talk about a lot of this, but unfortunately, that if you're not a top-ranked official in your association, it doesn't matter how many camps you go to, what you make on the test. There's only so many slots available for games. And what we try to do is we try to give some of the up and coming and some of the officials that are working hard to get better, maybe lower ranked in our association, but we try to give them some of the early round games so they get a taste of it and don't get discouraged too much. But I mean, if we only get 10 slots and we got, 25 referees that are postseason, you can, only get so much. Okay. We have in our bylaws that we're supposed to use the best available officials. That's during the season and also in the postseason. I mean, I think that's what the coaches and the players want, and that's what we try to do. But that being said, we don't want to work if we're the best available officials. If you and me, and we got top 5 officials, we don't want to put them out there every night, because if we did, then the other guys wouldn't get any games.
Right.
So we try to say, okay, maybe we use the top officials toward the end of the week when the games maybe matter more, and we let some of the up and coming officials and some of the mid-tier officials call during the early rounds of the tournament. And that's what we try to do to give them a taste of the and keep them hungry for going to postseason camps and those qualifications.
a couple of things that kind of jump out to me right there. So the first thing is you named quite a few things. You know, you got to register, you got to go to camps, you got to make test grades, you got to work a certain number of games. I'm sure,
Yeah.
with Georgia high school. So there's some demand there on behalf of the official to be qualified. How do the officials? Because when you look at like the other circuits that are not Georgia high school, that are like for example, AAU and different like recreation leagues and tournament leagues, they just put the best they got out there. There's very little training. There's very little testing. So my question is if you have guys that work both of those different circuits or those different arenas, if you will,
Mhm.
do you get pushback from people that have to do all these things to be playoff eligible?
Oh, we do. We do. I mean, some of them, like I said, we talked about this before, that it's really a kind of a more of a burden on the veteran guys. The veteran guys have been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, paying the $150 to go to postseason camp. Used to be every other year. So they would make sure they go every other year because they still want to call postseason. But then they cut it, they made it every year. And they said that it's not doing this anymore. It's just a burden on us. It's a really, it's a lot of, it's money, it's time away from their job. With basketball, which has really been one of my pet peeves, is every other sport is one day and $100 or less. With basketball camps in Georgia high school, it's $150 and it's usually 3 days.
Wow. Yeah.
So you got to take a couple of days off your job, and I get it because schools bring in um, teams and they have to call these games, but I think there's better ways to do this, and that may be a discussion for another day. But that's discouraging for some officials, especially older officials. Calling 3 or 4 scrimmages a day when none of the other sports to be qualified for postseason have to do that, and it's
You know,
it's
I tell you, one thing there's a lot of things about camps and that I think a lot of people disagree with, including myself. But I always try to go on record by saying I think Georgia is one of the standards when it comes to training and camps. Now, do we always agree with where the money goes and how much things are charged and all that stuff? Absolutely not. I don't think anybody's ever going to agree with all that. So I think there's some good. I think it's exactly what you're saying. There's a balance there, and we need to do a better job of trying to find that balance of, what is the right, the right requirements, what is the right amount of money, what is the right amount of content in camps and things of that nature. So, while I believe that Georgia does a great job with their camps, I think what you're saying is maybe it goes back to old school, like it was every other year, or something of that nature to kind of pull the pressure off of every year demands. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
For
Yeah, I
sure.
do, and I think I say it'll help the veterans a lot more than it would the younger guys. I mean, we still do. There's a lot of emphasis on camp, and camps are good, and you're going to learn something. But I think it's too top loaded for the requirements for a postseason, is because we've got other training. We got 8 or 9 meetings during the season that we have training. We have scrimmages. We have other clinicians. We have other training material that we take care of during the season. So you basing all your really judgment for main postseason assignments is going to this camp for 3 days, and it's just it's tough. I think we can do it a different way. But like you say, I think there's always some good. I mean, you're always going to learn something at camp,
Right.
but I think that it's discouraging to especially some of the veterans, to 40, 50, 60-year-old guys trying to get out there and still can run the floor, still do a great job on the varsity games in high school, but they're just not going to call 3 or 4 scrimmages a day, 3 days a week, and take time off from their job, pay $150, and do that every year. They're just not going to do it.
Well,
And
how are you on your supply of officials? I know everybody has a difficulty, with a depth and quality officials,
yeah,
but how are you on terms of bodies? Are there nights where you're just fighting to get bodies out, or are you pretty good on supply?
I tell you, we've got almost 90 officials registered with Georgia High School. Now, that being said, probably 40 of them do high school, maybe 50 we could use. We are fortunate, we're blessed that we have convinced and talked to Chatham Board of Education that we use 3-person crew on JV games. So we use that as a training ground as well.
That's awesome.
Most associations don't do that. So that helps us a little bit to get used to calling 3-person crew. If we've got 7 or 8 schools in our area on a given Friday night, it stretches us, no question, because we got to have a 3-person crew for JV and a 3-person crew for varsity. That's 6 officials times what, 7 or 8. I mean, that's a lot of officials. And if you got to go out of town, or I got to work that night, or got other engagement, then we've got to use the next best available. So sometimes we partner with other associations in our district to make sure we don't want to sacrifice quality. But I tell you what, Savannah's got good basketball and has for some time. We're always in this Final Four, state finals, state championships. So we're used to calling these games, and we mix it up. We have several crews that do top games just to try to give them some experience. So there are nights that we struggle. Could it be better crews? Yeah, you try to use a top guy and try to use some young guys to bring them up, but maybe use them on a private school game instead of a quad A game or something like that. That's what we try to do.
Well, I got a couple more questions around the playoffs, and that seems to be what me and you always the playoff selection process. We always kind of draw back to that. But I'm more familiar with other sports, so help me understand, what are the expenses associated, with basketball officiating in terms of playoff eligibility? So you mentioned $150 for the camp, right?
Right.
Plus you got weekday.
Excuse me.
That's going to be a weekday, most likely include a weekday.
Usually it's the Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
2 weekdays.
Usually it's 3 days. So you're taking usually 1, maybe 2 days off of work, whether it's vacation time, comp time, whatever you get, for most guys. So that's a cost. You also got to travel to the camp, travel back. Some of these camps, put you up in dorms, but a lot of them you're on your own for a hotel room or whatever. Some of them supply some meals, but you're on your own for some other meals. And that's pretty much, I guess, along with.
So that's that's a pretty reasonable expense just to be playoff qualified, where in turn you may only work the bulk of your officials are going to work 1 round. You're going to lose, you're going to lose 20% off of round 1 going to round 2. Yeah. Are there 5 rounds in basketball as well?
1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think there's 5 for the
finals. 5, yeah. So making your money back actually becomes quite a conversation point, because are you going to make what's a regular season game pay in basketball?
It's $56 a game. We usually do girls and boys varsity, so $112 usually.
Okay, and then what is a playoff fee for 1 game?
So $150 for the state tournament. I think 70, 75 or so, 70, 75 for the region tournament.
Okay, so basketball works a little different because there's multiple games in one site. But my point is, you got with a $10-15 increase in playoffs is what it sounds like per game.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have to work a few games to work off $150. Cost for the camp fee, your travel, your time off, your hotel, your food. That adds up. It doesn't make a lot of financial sense when you look at it that way. So, let me ask you this: if you could change one thing about the playoff selection process, and I know you could probably talk about this all night, but if you could drill it down to one single thing, what would you change?
I think the main thing is going back to every other year or once every 3 years for postseason officials. I think that would help the veterans. I think that would, you're saying one thing. I mean, like I said, I got to name you a handful, but I think the main thing is they put up with, from the people I talk to, the people that are under me, as well as other associations, they can deal with every other year. I think if the basketball postseason qualifications were one day $100 or less, like all the other sports, I think you'd get more response as well. That would be awesome. I don't know how you do it because you've got schools coming in, a lot of games to call. I think you'd have to maybe pay some officials to stay around and call. But I think if you made basketball camps the same qualifications as the other sports, I think that would be the main thing to work on,
there definitely seems to be some imbalance there, and I learned that about a year ago when I really started looking into this kind of stuff. So I think that's right. I think there's other sports that agree with what you're saying too. The first thing you noted was, making it every other year, going back to the way it was, every 2 years, or you even noted every 3 years. So, um, again, I think the word that kind of jumps out to me here is there's balance. There's some things that you got to go do. You got to get qualified. You got to learn the rules. You got to learn the mechanics.
Right.
But you can't just continue, to pony up and pay because just the game fees aren't there to cover the costs.
I agree.
So, um,
I will say too, Hayes, I mean, just speak on that as far as the games. When you call it state tournament, I may be going from Savannah, Georgia, all the way to Bainbridge, Georgia for one game. $150 to go 4 hours across the state and back. That's an 8-hour drive plus, miles, and it's 150 includes mileage. So, I mean, we're not doing this just for the money, but that doesn't entice some of the young officials to even want to do postseason. I
yeah,
mean, it's fine if I'm staying in Savannah or an hour away, but when you go 2 or 3 hours, Augusta, we used to go to Augusta every year. That's 2.5 hours one way,
yeah,
5-hour trip for $150. I mean, I could stay here and work 2 Pro games, $40 a game and be home in 2 hours, two and a
yeah.
half hours. So, I mean, like I say, there's a lot of things that we can discuss and get through this. But that's just,
Well, that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with this outlet. These kind of these recordings, and it'll be turned into podcasts and these little YouTube videos is really just conversations with guys like yourself that have been doing it for 30 plus years. You've seen a lot. You've learned a lot. You've seen the good times, the bad times, and I think the general consensus is that Georgia high school has done a great job marketing Georgia high school sports. I really
Mhm.
believe they have. When you can
Sure,
flip the TV on, you can find all kind of sports that Georgia teams are playing on from ESPN to any other channel you want to find. I think that there are, even though those things that they've done have been very, very good, there's some areas that are lacking that don't get enough attention, and I think officiating is an area that Georgia high school can focus on. And let's face it, if the high school sports are improving that rapidly, don't you think the officiating needs to improve that rapidly?
I agree.
You would think
And
that they're symbiotic, and um, so yeah. I mean, those are very, very good, valid points that not only are valid for this conversation, but they're valid across other sports, which I think really becomes a rally cry that we can fix this thing, because it's not a one-off problem.
right,
It's a big problem. So let's let's shift gears a minute. I want to talk to you about being a president of an association,
sure.
because that carries a little different duty than maybe in the trenches, as a everyday assigner, or a trainer. um, just walk me through some of the responsibilities, particularly with your organization, about being the president, and what does that mean?
I think the main thing, the emphasis that we have, try to have informative meetings. I tell the guys that, listen, we got 8 or 9 meetings. If I got to be there, you need to be there. We're all trying to get better. We're going to learn something. We have training. We have situations. We have on the floor, scrimmages sometimes. Videos are out there. We try to watch video, try to keep them active. I think for me, trying to have a training officer or training team that has different topics to talk about at every meeting. We all have administrative stuff. We all try to keep them positive. But what we did a few years back is that if you don't come to the first 3 out of 5 meetings before, say, Thanksgiving, you don't call till after January. Basketball starts, mid-November. Kind of takes a little break right before Christmas, has some Christmas tournaments, and then we crank back up heavy in January. So we found that, if I didn't make you come to the meeting, I fine you $5 or something, but they're not going to come. It's a Sunday afternoon. It's really nobody likes taking their Sunday as football games are going on, we hope. And so, it's tough to go to every meeting. We want you to go to learn, but that's one of the toughest things for me, is trying to have an agenda and trying to be informative, to keep it hour and a half, and keep training vital, and ask questions about situations in different games. That's the main thing for me.
So what's interesting there is I come from a group that kind of goes the fine route if you don't show up, which you said you've used that before, and
Yeah.
you now have an extended work date. So if you don't show up first 3 or 5, you extend it out, almost like a short-term suspension, if you will, or a delayed start, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
So I think it's interesting that, in order to, I think of back to my coaching days. If I walked onto a field, with, let's just say 16-year-olds, and I
Mhm.
had 10 guys in the dugout, the chances of me winning, even with better player for player, if I was better than you, it's still more difficult for me to win with 10 guys,
Sure.
or when I'm competing against a team that may have 16 guys. So my point is there's power in numbers, and it gives you flexibility, and you can hold people accountable, and you can do a better job when you have people to choose from. So I say that to draw these things together is, if you have the numbers in your association to hold your people accountable, saying, hey, if you don't come to this meeting, you're not going to work.
Right.
All it's going to do is make your product better. So when people think about this recruitment and retention thing, it's a very serious thing. And if they want, it's so easy to make, the officials the butt of the joke and, become a YouTube sensation unintentionally. That happens all the time. But it's difficult when you don't have people to choose from. You kind of have what you have. And so I think I think there's a correlation there between having numbers and being able to hold people accountable results in quality, and
That's a good point.
so I think that, kind of staying on that recruitment retention piece, it allows you to be able to do those things. And for people that are watching these shows that may not be officials, they may be fans, they may watch games. I think it's important for them to understand that we do punish people for not showing up, and we do have reprimands for people not doing their job. But when nobody shows up to work, you kind of got what you got,
Yeah.
And so that's
I
why all
think.
these things are important, like the cost that it's, to get started, and so on and so forth.
Well, I think along those lines, recruitment and retention, we talk about, and we have talked about for several years, is trying to get younger officials, because we're all getting older. I tell them, at the first meeting every year, I said, we're getting older, and the kids are getting younger. I said, but that maintains itself, and you've got to have younger officials come to take over for us. We can't do this forever. I don't see drones and robots taking our spots anytime soon. It's easy to call from the stands, but I don't think people want to volunteer for that as well. So the younger officials, just think about this: when you come to my association, just take Savannah. You just come to Savannah and you had never refereed basketball before, and you want to be a basketball official. Okay, so we start meetings in August, late August. Have a couple meetings in September, a couple in October, a couple in November. Then we have one in December, January, February, and have our banquet in March typically. So you're going to go, you're a young official. You're not going to do any JV, no middle school, no varsity for sure. Um, and you've got to sit and come through all these meetings, and you won't even get any games until January when the rec season starts. Okay. So I've got to beg you, I've got to keep working with you and talk to you before meetings, after the meetings, and kind of, we don't get books till mid-October. So you give them some old books. We talk about situations. We try to keep them interested. Bring your buddy with you. You're talking about a Sunday meeting. I'm trying to get you to come to meetings. I'm trying to get you to, we waive the dues on the first half of these young officials because they don't have it. They got to buy uniforms. I mean,
Right.
we're talking about a lot of things, that we've hashed out before, but that's a reality,
Yeah.
is that we're expecting new officials to come in and sit through all these meetings that we've got and not even get any income
Mm.
until January. And
Yeah,
that's
six,
with
8
10 and
weeks,
under
12
12
weeks.
games.
Mm,
Yeah.
depending on who you are, what associate. I know that's per association, but uh, it's the small minority of associations that pay, every couple of weeks. Most everybody is a couple months. So
Right.
let me ask you this: how do you, as the president, keeping your meetings informative, keeping them interested? What do you think is the best way to keep your officials motivated?
I think you've got, of course, pay is always a big key, and paying them sooner. I'm talking with the Board of Education. I'm talking with some of these private schools to see if we can get paid up front, pay early. Basketball is a little bit different because we're inside. We rarely have games that are forfeited or not played or canceled. Football because of weather, baseball because of weather. May or may not play at the end of the season unless this COVID thing. I mean, we pretty much going to play our basketball games. So if we can try to get some money up front where we can pay some of these officials, when they do games and keep them interested, I think pay is always going to be a big issue, whether it's not enough or whether it's, how often you can pay, because the young officials, young people in general, they want it now.
Well, I
So,
tell you, when we did our compensation study, that was definitely one thing that we looked at was not only the compensation amount, but was the frequency.
yep.
And that was a very I tell you, that was one thing I learned in doing that. You have when you have an everyday job that you live within that paycheck or those means,
Sure.
You're not really worried about your officiating money.
Right.
But you hear, there's the target official out there is the 18 to 22-year-old, which first of all, I don't agree with that. But if that is the target official, then those guys generally are in college. They don't have that would be their income.
Sure.
So imagine if me and you went to our day-to-day job and they didn't pay us for 8 weeks at a time. We're not going to work there.
No.
So I mean, these things when you take them, when you strip the officiating, label off of them, and you look at the policies that are in place, there's a lot of things that you wouldn't find happening in any other industry the way they happen in officiating. So particularly, the way we work within high school. So let me ask you this. So does Savannah basketball, do they focus primarily on GHSA and GISA, or do y'all have like rec and all that stuff?
Yes, we do. We have those. We take care of those. We have some other little private associations and private schools, but for of course, we got public middle school and private middle school as well. We got JV of those schools, and then we've also got rec ball. We've got boys club. We got church leagues. So we do pretty much all of it. City league.
Okay.
So
that's kind of leads me to my question. I wanted to qualify, what all you were working. So do you feel like that the opportunities exist? Well, let me reshape the question. Where are your opportunities? Are your opportunities in outside of high school sports, or do you feel like if we can kind of shape some things up, there's more opportunities in high school sports as it pertains to, allowing your officials to continue to, expand your association, more people wanting to come in and do this advocation, just, creating a more successful environment all the way around.
Well, I think we try to talk to, when we do summer leagues and spring leagues, fall leagues, we try to talk to some of these players and say, hey, if after high school or you guys have graduated, maybe you're playing adult league or something, and, hey, you ought to officiate, you make some pretty decent money just calling 4 games at the Y on Saturday, $25 a game for little kids. Go to boys club, do the same thing. Some of those games get paid within a couple of weeks. So you get a little spending money and you get a little exercise, you enjoy the game. And that's the way we try to phrase it, recruit that way. I've been to all the colleges, try to get them to, send me some of your players when, in the off season, summer leagues and stuff, you can, call a little bit. We try to use that. AAU's kind of got a little bad taste to it because you got so many. I mean, they pretty much stop clock. They want high school. They want you to call high school time limits and use $20 a game fees. So yeah, it's a training ground. Yeah, maybe the only game in town, but it's you get what you pay for kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a lot of the conversations I'm having. So I want to go back to that YMCA example that you used.
Sure.
You make a little spending money, make $25. I'm sure that's a running clock inside of,
Yes.
games, 1 hour, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much on the hour. Yeah.
So the funny thing is that we keep coming back to this $25 an hour, and the way you just described that story, and I hope I'm not, connecting unconnected ends here, but just to connect the dots for your story,
Sure.
you used the YMCA story as a recruiting tool and eventually turned them into high school officials. Right? Am I understanding that right? So what's funny is you're actually recruiting them in for one thing, and then it seems to be the goal is to make it to high school, but it actually financially is totally different game when you get to high school. You have to pay more to participate. It takes longer to get paid, and so it's almost like there's just a gap there. It just doesn't make sense to me in a lot of ways.
Well, I mean, it's a good point. You're exactly right. I mean, I use them as a tool to get in the game. Even at the boys' club, we may pay cash, $25 a game, and or the boys, the YMCA will be, will pay you within a week or two. The city leagues, sometimes pay about the same way, and it's pretty much basic. I'm telling you, we don't do any games for less than 25 starting off. Like you said, you get to high school, you got to be there an hour before the game. You're making, maybe do the game for an hour and a half, do 2 games, 3 hours, travel home. I mean, you're talking about, 5 hours or so, and you're making $112. That's less than $25 an hour,
Right.
and if you go on the road for Georgia high school, $150 in travel, and it's definitely less than $25 an hour. So, I
Wow.
mean, like I say, it's not all about the money, but that's a big part of it, to get these guys that carrot, so to speak, to get them over the hump. They're going to do it to make a little extra spending money, and hopefully enjoy the game, and make it a kind of a part-time career.
Yeah, I can definitely reciprocate that. I'm in a different sport, but I think officiating. I talked with a guy the other day, and one of the things he mentioned is that officiating for him has taught him how to deal with adversity. His
Sure.
playing career ended, in high school. He was able to carry this on past high school. He's a teacher and a coach, and the things that he's learned and how to deal with in the world of officiating has made him a better coach and made him a better teacher, because he learned how to deal with failure, and he's learned how to work within a team and all these things. So I try to always end these things on a high note and say, officiating is good. It's not perfect, but it is good. And what I hope to do is find that balance and that common ground by talking to guys like yourself, and maybe we can all work together to get our voice pointed in the right direction to figure out what is the right way to go. And
Yeah.
so, well, man, I'm gonna close it down there. I appreciate your time. These are fun for me. I hope it was fun for you.
Yeah, so we can talk
And
about it for a good while.
absolutely, man. Well, we'll definitely be circling back, get more information, insight from you. So, but until then, man, I really appreciate your time. Okay.
Thank you, Ace. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
See you, dude. Take care.
Bye.